Hello, welcome back. This is Lawrence at Lawrence Explains Online Academic Tuition. So after looking through the English language papers in previous videos, I'm going to start to have a look now at this Power and Conflict collection. It's one of 3 collections that are taught at GCSE level, and so we're going to begin with this collection of poems. And the first poem in the collection is the well-known Ozymandias, depending on how you want to pronounce it, by the poet Percy Shelley. So I'm going to just read through the poem first of all, and then after that we're going to discuss some of the context, some of the background, and just do a little bit of analysis on this poem itself. I met a traveller from an antique land, who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip, and sneer of cold command, tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them, and the heart that fed, and on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." Okay, so first things first, whenever we look at a poem in this collection, it's useful to know a little bit about the poet, him or herself, just to give us a little bit of context. So I've got another upload here on this next page. So we have Percy Shelley himself here, looking rather dashing in this painting here, this portrait here. There's quite a few of him online. You can see this is very much the pose of the romantic painter or poet. They used to wear these quite interesting collars, quite flamboyant looking collars. And he was a romantic poet, and by the word romantic I mean romantic in terms of the artistic movement, which encompasses both poetry, writing, and also painting as well. He died quite young, well, very young actually, died at 29 in a boating accident. Basically went out onto a sailboat where the crew was just not really at all equipped to be sailing, and they had some bad weather, and that was that. They did find his body. It took 10 days for them to find his body, so he died really far too young, as several of the romantic poets did. You may recognize the second name. You may have heard of Mary Shelley. She was the author, of course, of Frankenstein. This is Percy's wife, Percy's second wife, and they eloped together, and they were also both good friends of Lord Byron, who is one of the more notable poets and kind of figures of the Romantic period. So just to explain this term romantic, because it's going to come up in other videos, so I'd like to explain it now. Romanticism as an artistic movement is a reaction to rationalism. Okay, and Romanticism is a reaction to it. So rationalism is the relatively new Enlightenment 18th century concept of using reason, testing science, rather than the word of God and inspiration, to make predictions about the world, to interact with the world, and ultimately to rule and govern eventually. So rationalism is, it's really probably the most crucial movement, or one of the more crucial movements in intellectual history, and it came out of Europe in the 18th century. And really, it's the thing that led us to where we are today. You do not have the internet, electricity, and so on if we have never been through this rationalist period. It seems obvious to us now, but it was not obvious at this particular point in time, and still to this day in some parts of the world, rationalists, you couldn't say that they have a rationalist worldview. Romanticism is a kind of artistic rebellion against rationalism. And you think, well, why would you want to rebel against rationalism? Surely this is like a really good thing, right? It gives birth to science. It brings in the modern world. But what the Romantics saw, and in credit to them, they saw this very early, is they saw that there were limitations to rationalism as a kind of way of interfacing with the world. And what rationalism leaves out are the human emotions, the human passions, God, the divine, the grand, even nature itself. So the Romantics focused in on the emotions, the subjective, the passions, the divine, the grand, the grandiose, and nature as well. So those are the key themes of Romantic works. Go away and look up Romantic paintings. There's some brilliant paintings from this period, and a lot of the artwork and poetry was kind of considered the same stuff. So Percy Shelley was really a classic Romantic, and we can see that in this poem. So let's just go back and do a little bit of analysis here. So in terms of the frame of the poem, the way this is framed, here we have, I met a traveller from an antique land. So the frame is, it's a kind of anecdote. Someone saying to you or to somebody, I met somebody who told me this. So it's a story twice removed from the original story, from the original events. I met someone who told me this. Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read. Okay, so just to illustrate exactly what is being talked about here, I actually have the illustration because the figure, these trunkless legs, is the figure of Ramses II. And this is the exact thing we're talking about here. This is the exact thing that Shelley is talking about. Trunkless legs and the visage lying as well behind it, or in this case in front of it in this photo. So this is Ramses II. He was a Egyptian pharaoh, who had more artwork of himself commissioned than any other. He also had more children than any other. So he was this very, very big, powerful, kind of self-aggrandizing pharaoh. And there seems to be something of a tone of critique, shall we say, wrinkled lip, sneer of cold command. This creates a sense that this guy Ramses was authoritarian, cold as well. So it's kind of authoritarian and maybe you could say tyrannical or dictatorial. Tell that its sculptor well these passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things. So his expression still survives, even though Ramses himself doesn't. And there's a bit of an emphasis on the fact that this is just stone. These are now lifeless. The hand that mocked them, the heart that fed. So again, we're talking about Ramses here, and I think we're talking about his relationship to the people, the hand that mocked them, the heart that fed. So this kind of suggestion he has a sort of scornful kind of arrogance about him, and his own people he kind of mocks and scorns. And on the pedestal these words appear: my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. So let's just have a look at this. So he announces himself. Look on my works, ye mighty in despair. So we're reading the pedestal now. We're reading the base of the statue. And he says, look on my works, ye mighty in despair. So this is his great proclamation. Look at what I've achieved. And just despair. And he's not just addressing this to anyone. He's addressing this to ye mighty. So he's addressing this to other powerful people, maybe other powerful men in the kingdom, or other rulers in different places, or even future rulers, future pharaohs. And he's saying to them, look at what I've done and despair. So basically, compare yourself to me and look how inferior you are. Go and cry in a corner because I am so much better than you. So this is a real play of status. This is a real kind of command. Look at me, look how good I am, and just compare yourself to me. As strong as you are, you should despair at how great I am and how much superior I am to you. So this is a real kind of, I would say it's borderline narcissistic, but it's certainly like, it's a very self-aggrandizing, self-promoting message there. And the fact that it's also addressed to the mighty, it's like he doesn't even consider, it's a given that he considers himself above normal, the kind of normal class of people. But he also wants to compare himself and put himself even higher than even the great leaders. So this is a real self-aggrandizing proclamation and statement. And yet, in the very next line, in a sense, these words are severely humbled. Nothing beside remains, so his kingdom has faded away. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. So round the decay of the work, so nothing beside remains. There's a great contrast between the statement of Ramses and then what actually remains of his kingdom is, it's barren and it's kind of decaying. So there's immediately humbled, really. And what is he humbled by? He is essentially humbled by time. The wreck is also capitalized as well, so it's really like emphasizing the fact that even this great statue is now a wreck. Even the very statue itself that Ramses built, that must in its time have stood, this huge, powerful monument, is now nothing but a wreck. Boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. So the concept of, the sands stretching away into the distance, this is very much a kind of romantic notion as well, like considerations of time, the infinite. These are kind of characteristic of the romantic movement. These are the types of things that the romantics were concerned about. They weren't concerned about, little day-to-day things. Romantic art is concerned with the great, the grand, the significant. It's not kind of day-to-day stuff. So he's talking about this great monument, this great powerful king, and then also how time and the infinite, and the infinite kind of change of things eventually reduces the power of Ozymandias to basically nothing, to zero. So it reduces power down to zero. So we've got the kind of contrast between the proclamation and the narcissism, the self-aggrandizement of Ozymandias himself, and then how his monument is sunk away and has now kind of faded into nothing. So those are some of the main themes in the poem. There's some nice, language we can analyze here. We've got the semantic field of a kind of arrogant, authoritarian commander, wrinkled lips, sneer, cold command. And then the idea of him mocking his own people. And it's a very visual short poem. So this one that compares well with several other poems. And we'll come back to, in a future video, which poems you want to compare with each other. So hopefully that is going to be a useful little run through for you of this poem. I will catch you in the next video.